I went to my granddaughter's wedding at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston carrying a vintage pearl necklace that belonged to my late wife. But at the grand ballroom doors, my own son blocked my path. He looked me dead in the eye and whispered, "Dad, you are not on the list. There was a mistake. Go home." 200 of the city's elite guests stared at me. I did not yell. I did not beg. I just said, "It is fine, son." I walked out into the freezing night, got into my car, and called my attorney. The next morning, my son received a letter that completely destroyed his life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I am Richard, 70 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful corporate founder, I thought I had given them everything, but I only fed their greed. Let me tell you exactly how it happened. The winter wind cutting across Boston Common was brutal that evening, but I barely felt it. I was 70 years old, wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that my late wife Sarah had always loved. In my right pocket, resting against my chest, was a worn velvet box. Inside it lay Sarah's vintage pearl necklace, the exact one she wore on our wedding day 45 years ago. I had been saving it for this very night to clasp it around the neck of my granddaughter Harper before she walked down the aisle. I stepped out of my Lincoln town car and handed the keys to the valet, taking a deep breath of the crisp December air. The Ritz-Carlton lobby was a symphony of warmth and elegance. Soft piano music drifted through the air, mingling with the low hum of wealthy conversations and the clinking of crystal glasses. I walked toward the grand ballroom, feeling a profound sense of pride. I had spent 40 years building Mitchell Global Supply from a single rusted delivery truck into a global logistics empire. I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and countless weekends just to ensure that my family would never know the sting of poverty. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination of all that hard work. I was going to watch my beautiful granddaughter marry the man she loved at an event that I had entirely funded. As I approached the carved mahogany doors of the ballroom, the heavy scent of imported white orchids filled the corridor. I smiled, recognizing the flowers. Then I saw him. My son Bradley stood right at the entrance, looking sharp in a tailored tailcoat. For a fleeting second, my heart swelled. I thought he was waiting there to greet me, to walk me inside and seat me at the family table. I raised my hand to wave, but as I got closer, the smile on my face slowly died. Bradley's posture was rigid. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes, darting nervously toward the crowd inside, held absolutely no warmth. He stepped directly into my path, physically blocking the double doors with his broad shoulders. "Dad," he whispered, his voice low and tight. "What are you doing here?" The question threw me off balance. "What do you mean?" "What am I doing here, Bradley?" "I am here for Harper's wedding." I tapped my pocket. "I brought your mother's pearls for her." Bradley swallowed hard, glancing over his shoulder before turning back to me. His expression hardened into a mask of cold indifference. "Dad, you are not on the list." I stared at him, trying to process the words. I thought it was a joke, a poor attempt at wedding day humor. "Not on the list." "Bradley, I am the grandfather of the bride." "There was a mistake with the seating chart," he said without breaking eye contact. "The venue is at strict capacity. The fire marshal is very particular about these things. There is literally no chair for you in there. Go home, Dad. Go home before you cause a scene and ruin Harper's night." My blood ran cold. The sheer absurdity of his words hung in the air like a physical blow. A mistake. Strict capacity. 6 months ago, Bradley had come to my house begging for financial help. He told me Harper needed capital for her new startup and a budget for the wedding. Without a second thought, I had my bank wire $1.2 million directly into his personal account. I funded every single aspect of this lavish affair. The champagne flowing inside the imported orchids, filling the halls, the jazz band playing in the background, I paid for all of it. And now the man who took my money was standing in the doorway, telling me there was no chair for me. Before I could formulate a response, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the ballroom entrance. It was my daughter-in-law, Monica. She was draped in a designer silk gown, holding a glass of champagne. She slipped her arm through Bradley's and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the kind of look you give a beggar who has wandered too close to your table at a fine dining restaurant. Richard, what part of go home do you not understand? She sneered, her voice dripping with venom. This is an exclusive event. We cannot have you wandering around confusing the guests. We have important people here tonight. I looked past her shoulder into the brightly lit ballroom. The doors were open wide enough for me to see the crowd. These were not just friends of the bride and groom. I recognized faces. I saw venture capitalists I used to negotiate with. I saw shipping magnates and former partners from Mitchell Global Supply. These were my peers, my colleagues, the elite circle of the Boston business world. And they were watching me. I could see them whispering to each other, covering their mouths with their hands, pointing subtly at the 70-year-old founder of the company, being turned away at the door like a common wedding crasher. The humiliation burned my cheeks, but it was quickly swallowed by a glacial clarity. Monica leaned in closer, her heavy perfume turning my stomach. Security is standing right over there, Richard. If you do not turn around and walk out those doors right now, I will have them escort you off the premises. Do not test me. Any other father might have screamed. Any other man might have demanded to see his granddaughter, or caused a massive scene to expose them in front of the 200 guests. But I did not survive 40 years in the corporate shark tank by throwing tantrums. I knew that screaming would only validate whatever lies they had already told the crowd about me. I looked at Monica taking in the diamonds hanging from her ears, diamonds bought with my money. Then I looked at Bradley, the son I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had given everything to. He refused to meet my gaze, looking down at the polished marble floor instead. "It is fine, son," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "I understand completely. Do not worry about me." I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on them and walked away. The heavy mahogany doors shut behind me, sealing the warmth and the music inside, but I did not look back. I walked through the lobby, my footsteps echoing against the stone floor. The valet looked surprised to see me return so quickly, but he hurried to retrieve my car. When I stepped out into the freezing Boston night, the cold air hit my face like a splash of ice water, bringing me fully back to my senses. I slid into the quiet leather interior of my Lincoln Town Car. The silence of the cabin was deafening. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet box, running my thumb over the worn fabric. They did not just reject me. They erased me. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly began clicking together in my mind. The lack of phone calls, the vague excuses, the sudden demand for cash 6 months ago. This was not a seating chart mistake. This was a calculated execution. I pulled out my cell phone. The clock on the dashboard read 7:30 p.m. I dialed the private number of Jonathan Pierce, my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the second ring. "Richard," he said, sounding surprised. "Should you not be giving a toast at the Ritz right now?" "Jonathan," I said, my voice void of any emotion. "Bradley just locked me out of the wedding." A heavy pause fell over the line. The seasoned lawyer knew exactly what that meant. "What do you need me to do, Richard?" "Trigger the winter protocol," I commanded, staring out the tinted window at the glowing facade of the hotel. "Freeze everything. The trust, the accounts, the corporate access. I want every single dollar tied to that boy locked down by sunrise." "It is done, Richard," Jonathan replied, a dangerous edge entering his tone. "But you need to see the bank logs first thing tomorrow. They did not just spend the wedding money. They have been digging into the corporate vault." I ended the call and leaned my head back against the leather seat. They thought they had won. They thought they had humiliated a helpless old man. But tomorrow morning, my son and his greedy wife were going to learn a very painful lesson. You do not lock the wolf out of the house when the wolf is the one who built it. I settled into the deep leather seat of my Lincoln town car. The heavy door closed with a solid thud, blocking out the biting Boston wind and the faint strains of jazz music spilling from the Ritz-Carlton lobby. Inside the cabin it was completely silent, save for the low hum of the engine. My driver Martin glanced at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes carried a quiet concern. He had been driving me for over 15 years, and he knew the schedule perfectly well. He knew I was supposed to be walking Harper down the aisle right at this very moment. "Are you all right, Mr. Mitchell?" Martin asked, his voice gentle and respectful. I did not answer immediately. I took the velvet box containing Sarah's vintage pearl necklace out of my pocket and placed it carefully on the leather seat next to me. The pearls felt incredibly heavy now, as if they absorbed all the weight of the evening. I smoothed the lapels of my tuxedo and let out a long, measured breath. I was not angry. I was not devastated. A strange, absolute calm had settled over my mind like a fresh layer of frost. "I am perfectly fine, Martin," I said, keeping my voice entirely steady. "Drive me to Beacon Hill. Take the long way through the city." "Right away, sir," he replied, shifting the car into gear and pulling smoothly away from the curb. I watched the glowing facade of the hotel shrink in the side mirror. My son and my daughter-in-law were inside that golden box, drinking expensive champagne bought with my money, entertaining the elite circles of the city while tossing me into the cold. It was a flawless execution of disrespect. But it was not an emotional outburst. It was a calculated test. As the car glided through the illuminated streets of downtown Boston, I stared at the towering glass skyscrapers that defined the financial district. I had spent 40 years of my life conquering this city. Building Mitchell Global Supply from a single rusting delivery truck into a multi-million-dollar international logistics empire was not a matter of luck. It took 4 decades of ruthless negotiations, sleepless nights, and a relentless drive to succeed. I sacrificed my own youth so that my family would never have to experience the suffocating grip of poverty that I grew up with. I remembered the early days when Sarah and I lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment. I remembered working consecutive night shifts, loading pallets with my own bleeding hands, while Bradley slept safely in his crib. I paid for his elite private schools, his Ivy League education, his sports cars, and his luxury vacations. I gave him a life completely insulated from hardship. I built a fortress of wealth around him, hoping it would make him a strong, secure man. Instead, it made him incredibly weak and dangerously greedy. Looking out at the harbor lights reflecting on the dark water, I realized the bitter truth. The incident at the ballroom doors was not a sudden misunderstanding about a seating chart or a strict fire marshal capacity limit. Monica's sneering face and Bradley's refusal to meet my eyes told a much deeper story. They were probing the perimeter. They were testing the fences to see if the old man was finally too weak, too tired, or too senile to fight back. They thought my grief over losing Sarah had softened my spine. They assumed I would just go home, cry quietly into my whiskey, and accept my forced retirement from the family hierarchy. They calculated that I would avoid a public scandal at all costs. They were right about the scandal. I despise public theatrics, but they were fundamentally wrong about my willingness to surrender. You do not survive 40 years in the global shipping industry by turning the other cheek when someone tries to cut your throat. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I did not shed a single tear. There was no room for sorrow when survival was on the line. I scrolled to the private number of Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan was not just a corporate attorney. He was a legal predator, a man who navigated the treacherous waters of corporate law with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a mercenary. He had been my closest advisor for 2 decades. The phone rang exactly twice before he answered. Richard Jonathan said, his deep voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "I was expecting to hear from you tomorrow. Should you not be giving the patriarch's speech at the reception right now?" I kept my eyes fixed on the passing streetlights. Jonathan. Bradley locked me out of the wedding. He stopped me at the doors and told me I was not on the list. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Jonathan knew the exact power dynamics of my family. He knew the massive financial contributions I had recently made to support Bradley's lifestyle and Harper's supposed business ventures. He understood immediately that this was an act of war. I see Jonathan finally said, his tone shifting from casual conversation to cold professional focus. "What are your instructions, Richard?" "Trigger the winter protocol," I commanded. "Freeze everything." The winter protocol was a contingency plan we had drafted years ago during a particularly vicious, hostile takeover attempt by a rival firm. It was designed to sever all financial arteries immediately. Executing it meant freezing every trust account, every shared corporate credit line, and every piece of collateral tied to the Mitchell estate. It meant shutting off the lifeblood of Bradley's luxurious existence in a matter of seconds. "I want the trust frozen." I continued, my voice echoing softly in the quiet car. "I want the shared company cards deactivated. I want the escrow account, where I deposited the $1.2 million placed under an immediate administrative lock. If he tries to buy a pack of gum tomorrow morning, I want his card declined. He wants me out of his life. He can start by paying for his own." I could hear the rapid clicking of a keyboard on Jonathan's end of the line. Even on a Saturday night, he was sitting in his home office ready to mobilize our defense. "Consider it done, Richard," Jonathan said. "I am submitting the electronic freeze requests to the primary financial institutions right now. The blackout will be fully effective before midnight. I will draft the notices," Jonathan assured me. But he did not hang up. I heard him take a slow, heavy breath. "Richard," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "while I have the banking portal open, I am looking at the transaction logs for the primary corporate holding accounts. It is done, Richard. The protocol is active. But you need to come to my office tomorrow morning. You must see these bank logs with your own eyes. They did not just spend the wedding money, Richard. They have actually been digging deep into the main corporate vault now. We have to act right now before the sunrise." I ended the call with Jonathan and instructed Martin to pull up to my Beacon Hill residence. The wrought iron gates swung open silently, welcoming me into a home that suddenly felt too large and too empty. I stepped out of the car, thanked Martin for his loyalty, and walked through the heavy oak front doors. The house was completely dark, save for the ambient moonlight filtering through the tall windows. I did not bother turning on the main lights. I walked straight down the hallway and entered my home office. The rich scent of aged leather and mahogany usually brought me comfort, but tonight it offered no solace. I began to pace the length of the Persian rug, the rhythmic sound of my footsteps echoing against the walls lined with decades of corporate awards and framed newspaper clippings. My mind was racing, trying to untangle the web of deception that had just ensnared me. How did a man who spent 40 years anticipating the treacherous maneuvers of global competitors miss a betrayal taking root inside his own family? The answer was painful but simple. I had taken off my armor around my own blood. I allowed myself to be a father instead of a chief executive officer. It started exactly 6 months ago, right here in this very room. The memory played in my mind with agonizing clarity. I was sitting at my desk reviewing quarterly projections when the doors flew open. Bradley stormed in, his face flushed, and his tie loosened, a perfect portrait of a man on the edge of a total breakdown. He collapsed into the chair across from me, breathing heavily, and dropped a thick stack of manila folders onto my desk. He told me that he had received an advanced warning from a contact at the Internal Revenue Service. According to Bradley, the agency was launching a brutal, comprehensive audit on our family trust. He spun a terrifying narrative claiming they were targeting my personal retirement funds and threatening to freeze the entire estate while the investigation dragged on for years. He said the scrutiny was triggered by an aggressive new tax regulation and that our traditional corporate shields were temporarily vulnerable. He looked me in the eyes, his hands actually shaking, and delivered his plausible lie. "Dad, They are targeting your retirement funds, he had pleaded, his voice cracking with manufactured desperation. We need to sign a temporary power of attorney right now. We have to move $1.2 million into a secure escrow account under my name. It is the only way to protect your liquid assets and secure her entire future until the audit ends. Looking back now, the corporate titan inside me should have seen the glaring holes in his story. I should have called my own accountants. I should have demanded to see the official federal notices. I should have summoned Jonathan Pierce immediately. But Bradley did not come to the founder of Mitchell Global Supply. He came to his father. He came to a man who was still drowning in the quiet, lingering grief of losing his wife. Sarah had always been the emotional anchor of our family, the one who held us together. Without her, I was desperate to keep the remaining pieces of our family intact. When a son comes to you, terrified, pleading for help to save her very future, the ruthless businessman steps aside and the protective father takes the wheel. I signed the documents because my fundamental instinct was to shield my boy from a crisis. I wanted to absorb his panic. I wanted to fix the problem just as I had fixed every other problem in his life since he was a child. I believed I was placing a protective wall around our family wealth, unaware that I was actually handing him the keys to the vault. I authorized the transfer of $1.2 million, believing it was going to a safe harbor. I stopped pacing. The heavy silence of the office snapped me back to the present moment. The chill of the Boston night seemed to seep through the window panes, creeping into my bones. Bradley had used my protective instinct as a weapon against me. He had weaponized my love for Harper and my grief for Sarah to orchestrate a massive financial extraction. But the game was not over. If Jonathan was right about the bank logs, the rabbit hole was much deeper than a stolen wedding fund. I walked around the massive desk and sat in my high-backed leather chair. I woke up my laptop. The screen cast a harsh blue glow across the darkened room. I logged into my encrypted personal server, navigating through layers of security protocols to access my digital archives. I needed to see the document that had started this entire nightmare. I needed to scrutinize the temporary power of attorney that I had signed 6 months ago. My fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, opening the scanned file. The document appeared on the screen, bearing my bold signature at the bottom of the final page. I zoomed in on the fine print, my eyes scanning the legal jargon with the cold precision of a predator hunting for a blood trail. Bradley had rushed me through the signing process, pointing only to the signature lines, claiming time was of the essence. Now isolated in the silence of my office, I read every single word. I scrolled down to the notary acknowledgement section. My eyes locked onto the circular stamp pressed into the bottom corner. A chilling realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The notary seal on the document was not from Pearson and Associates, the prestigious corporate law firm that had handled the Mitchell family affairs for nearly 3 decades. The name on the seal belonged to an entity called Apex Fiduciary Solutions. It was a generic name, the kind of name designed to sound legitimate, while revealing absolutely nothing. I opened a new browser tab and ran a quick search on the registry of corporate entities. My suspicion was confirmed in seconds. Apex Fiduciary Solutions was not a law firm. It was not a registered financial institution. It was a shell company incorporated in Delaware just 3 days before Bradley had stormed into my office with his fabricated audit story. He had not just panicked and made a mistake. He had premeditated the entire extraction. He had set up a dummy corporation, manufactured a fake federal crisis, and brought in a fraudulent notary to legitimize the theft of my assets. He had been planning to drain me dry long before he ever stood at the doors of the Ritz-Carlton. Every single detail of his panic had been carefully rehearsed to bypass my natural corporate defenses. He played me for a fool, banking on my paternal love to blind me to his immense betrayal. But as I sat staring at the glowing screen, the sorrow completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating wrath. The father who had indulged him was officially dead. The CEO was back, and I was going to war. I told Jonathan I would be at his office by 5 in the morning, and ended the call. Placing my phone on the polished mahogany desk, I leaned back in my leather chair. The silence of the house pressed against my ears like a physical weight. Digging deep into the main corporate vault. Those words spoken by my attorney echoed continuously through my mind. They were not just content taking the $1.2 million I had transferred for my granddaughter's future. They were systematically dismantling the financial foundations of Mitchell Global Supply. My son was actively raiding the empire I built. I closed my eyes and let out a long, measured breath. The initial shock was beginning to fade away completely, replaced by a cold, analytical clarity. I needed to map out how they managed to orchestrate such a massive deception right under my nose. I was a man who noticed everything. In business, a misplaced decimal point or a slight hesitation in a vendor's voice would trigger my suspicion. Yet I completely missed a multi-million-dollar heist executed by my own flesh and blood. How did they blind me so effectively? I opened my eyes and looked at the framed photograph of Sarah resting on the corner of my desk. Her warm, confident smile stared back at me. That was the answer. They had used her. They had weaponized my grief and my age to construct a perfect psychological cage around me. The emotional manipulation was far more insidious than the financial theft. They knew I would never question anything that involved protecting the family from unnecessary stress. The second massive lie clicked into place with sickening precision. I cast my memory back to a Tuesday afternoon exactly 3 months ago. The wedding was supposed to be rapidly approaching, but the house was incredibly quiet. I had not received any updates about catering selections, venue deposits, or guest lists. As a man who spent his life managing complex global supply chains, the lack of logistical chatter made me inherently anxious. I had called Bradley that morning and asked him to set up a meeting with the wedding planner. I wanted to review the arrangements and ensure Harper was getting the absolute best service possible. Bradley had sounded slightly panicked on the phone, offering a vague excuse about the planner being unavailable. 2 hours later, my doorbell rang. It was not Bradley or the wedding planner. It was Monica. She stepped into my foyer wearing a beige cashmere sweater and an expression of profound distress. I led her into the formal living room and offered her a cup of tea. She declined, sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were red and watery. She looked like a mother carrying an unbearable emotional burden. "Dad?" She began, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. "I came over because we need to talk about the wedding. Harper is just so incredibly overwhelmed right now. She is crying every single night, and we do not know what to do." I had immediately leaned forward, my protective instincts flaring up. I asked her what was wrong, assuming there was an issue with the vendor or a problem with the bridal party. Monica let out a shaky breath and produced a single perfect tear that rolled slowly down her cheek. It was a masterful performance. "She does not want a massive spectacle," Dad, Monica said, wiping her eye. "She is terrified of the stress. All these expectations and grand plans are making her incredibly anxious. She broke down crying last night. She told us she only wants a tiny 20-person backyard dinner with immediate family and close friends. Nothing formal. Nothing exhausting." I had sat back, surprised by the sudden change in direction. I told Monica that I had already allocated significant funds to give Harper a fairy tale event. I insisted that we could hire more staff to handle the stress, so Harper would not have to lift a finger. But Monica shook her head rapidly, reaching out to place her warm hand over mine. "It is not just about Harper," she whispered, her voice dropping to a soft, sympathetic pitch. "Dad, we are so incredibly worried about you. You have been so tired lately. Losing Sarah took such a massive toll on your heart and your stamina. A huge society wedding with hundreds of guests would be exhausting for you. We cannot bear the thought of putting your health at risk just to host a party. Harper wants it small because she wants you to be comfortable and safe. We just want to protect you." I sat in my dark office tonight, remembering how those poisoned words had made me feel. They had wrapped their betrayal in a blanket of fake filial piety. They used the devastating loss of my wife to convince me that I was a fragile, broken old man who needed to be shielded from the world. They preyed on my deepest insecurities. Since Sarah passed away, I had felt a lingering exhaustion that made the world seem heavier. Monica took that natural grief and twisted it into a narrative of physical and mental decline. She made me believe that my own granddaughter was scaling back her dreams purely out of concern for my failing health. My response that afternoon 3 months ago now felt like a dagger twisting in my ribs. I had swallowed the lie completely. I had patted Monica's hand and told her not to worry. I told her that if Harper wanted a quiet 20-person backyard dinner, then that is exactly what she would get. I promised to step back completely to stop